Jonas had always believed that the forest had a way of whispering secrets to those patient enough to listen, secrets that could unravel the knotted threads in a weary soul. Standing at the edge of the sanctuary, the early morning mist clung to his skin like a damp promise, cool tendrils weaving through the dense pines and firs. Sky still kept its pale lavender bruise from the night's dark, timid stars, faintly fading as daylight stretched her fingers across the horizon. His boots trod softly on the mossy earth, the scent of damp wood mingling with the faint sweetness of resin. Each breath he took seemed to cleanse a little of the city's clinging weight from his lungs, the sanctuary already working its subtle magic just by welcoming him home. This was Jonas's sanctuary, not just the sprawling wilderness around him, but the small cabin nestled between towering oaks and wildflower patches. It was simple, wooden walls smoothed by time and care, windows framed with peeling white paint, and the inside smelling of cedar and chamomile. He had spent years sculpting this space to be a haven, a place where broken pieces could start to find their edges again. Today, however, felt different. He wasn't preparing for the usual retreat today. New client arrived. Gabriel had reached out almost hesitantly, voice low and precise, on the phone, saying he needed help, more than just therapy. Jonas knew from the clicked tone and the silence that followed those words that Gabriel wasn't looking for easy answers. He was looking for refuge, for a quiet that city walls could never hold. Jonas stood by the small wooden table inside, aligning journals, placing fresh water in a carved wooden bowl, and lighting a subtle blend of sage and pine incense. The sanctuary was alive with the hum of the forest outside, the rustling of leaves in the morning breeze, the distant melodic trills of unseen birds, the sharp skittering of a squirrel darting through underbrush. These sounds filled the room like a quiet symphony, grounding the silence as much as the walls themselves. He ran a hand through his dark, wavy hair, crooking his fingers near the thin scar above his right eyebrow, the souvenir of a recklessness he'd long since buried, but which always seemed to prick at the edges of his calm. At exactly the time Gabriel was due, the sound of a dusty truck engine crunched softly up the gravel road leading to the cabin. Jonas drew a slow breath, trying to steady the flutter of nerves that coiled inside him. He didn't know what to expect, wasn't sure how this man Gabriel, who claimed to be straight, would fit into this fragile ecosystem of healing. But there was a subtle urgency in Gabriel's message that pulled Jonas from his usual patience. Something was broken beneath Gabriel's calm that cried out for something beyond words. The door creaked softly as he opened it, and there stood Gabriel, tall, broad-shouldered, sandy blonde hair, tousled from travel, eyes the clear blue of a late winter sky. His posture bore the weight of unspoken battles, and there was a brief falter when their gazes met. Jonas noticed the casual stubble framing Gabriel's jawline, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, as if unsure where to put them. "Jonas?" Gabriel's voice was low, edged with exhaustion, and something raw-like he was asking permission to exist here. He shifted his weight awkwardly, the scent of fresh pine, deeper than Jonas would have guessed, mixed with hints of smoke and something more elusive. "Gabriel?" Jonas said softly, stepping forward, his voice calm, a steady anchor in the swirling quiet. "Welcome to the sanctuary. Come in. Make yourself at home. We're far from the city here, far from noise." He paused, his gaze lingering on the tension in Gabriel's shoulders. "And from judgment." Gabriel offered a small, tense nod. His hands dropped, fingers brushing against the door frame as if to steady himself. "Thank you," he murmured, eyes flickering down to the rustic floor, then to the notebooks Jonas had neatly arranged. I'm not really sure what I'm doing here." His admission was unguarded. "Brittle, not like this." Jonas gestured toward the wooden chairs set near a wide window that framed an ancient tree, its branches spread like open arms beneath the vast sky. That's okay. None of us really are. But sometimes honesty is the first step. He pulled open the door wide to invite in more of the forest. The scent of wet earth mingled with the sharp tang of pine needles in the breeze. You don't have to use words if you don't want to. The forest listens differently. Gabriel's lips twitched, nearly a smile. But the vulnerability bled through his blue eyes. It's just, I'm not used to needing anyone. Especially not like this. His voice cracked slightly under the weight of the confession. And I know I'm supposed to be straight, but something inside me, it's not that simple anymore. Maybe it never was. His breath hitched, and he glanced away, as if the truth would shatter the fragile calm. Jonas didn't rush to fill the silence. He let it stretch between them, like a tentative bridge being lowered over shadowy waters. Outside, a woodpecker tapped at a distant tree, steady and sure. It was an ordinary sound, but at that moment it felt like a heartbeat in the quiet room. Jonas nodded, acknowledging the courage it took just to start this conversation. This place will listen. It holds no expectations, no labels. Just space to be. Gabriel swallowed hard, then stepped inside fully, the door closing softly behind him. The sanctuary felt colder with the absence of the fresh morning air, but also more intimate, cocooned in the scent of cedar and sage. He rubbed his arms as if trying to hold on to himself through the moment. They didn't rush. Jonas poured 2 cups of steaming herbal, tea mint, and chamomile, balancing them carefully and handing one to Gabriel. The warmth seeped into his hands, and for the first time the hardness in his jaw softened a fraction. "You don't have to tell me everything," Jonas said gently. "Not all at once. Just what you're ready to share. Sometimes it's enough to be seen." Gabriel's fingers curled tightly around the cup, knuckles white. His gaze dropped again to the swirling steam rising between them. "I haven't been seen for a long time. Not really. Not since before I left everything behind." The quiet in his voice contained years of silence. "That's why I came here, to find something I lost." Jonas felt the weight of loneliness in those words, an echo of his own history. He reached out, lightly, as if to offer something steady. "Then let's discover what that is. Together. No magic cures, just presence." A fragile flicker of something trust, maybe, passed through Gabriel's eyes. He let the cup settle between his palms, and at last a tremor in his voice. "Okay." The forest beyond the cabin was waking fully now, the canopy filtering the sun into dappled patterns that danced lazily on the moss. Fresh pine needles snapped quietly underfoot as Jonas led Gabriel along a narrow trail that weaved through the towering trees, their whispers rustling softly overhead. The 2 men moved in measured silence, their footsteps melding with the breaths of the woodland creatures that peered shyly from their hidden homes. Jonas had designed these walks to be more than mere exercise. Here among the ancient giants and wild ferns, the sanctuary whispered lessons in patience, resilience, and stillness. Gabriel's broad shoulders carried invisible burdens as he struggled to match Jonas's calm, his sharp blue eyes darting at every unexplained sound, the sudden flutter of a hawk's wings, the rustle of small mammals skittering through leaf litter. They stopped near a crystal-clear stream, a narrow ribbon of water tumbling over smooth stones, its quiet murmur blending with the distant calls of the forest. Jonas settled on a large rock, patting the cool surface beside him. Gabriel hesitated, then lowered himself down with evident effort, the muscles in his legs tense, as if unused to such quiet. Jonas studied him, noting the tightness around Gabriel's jaw, the way his palms rested rigid on his thighs. "Tell me about the past," Jonas said softly, his voice a gentle invitation, more than a demand. "Only what you want. Keep what you need." Gabriel's answer, was a breath held too long. A fragile shell of veneer cracking at the edges. I grew up always feeling like I was playing a role, Gabriel confessed, eyes fixed on the stream's glittering surface. Like some script someone else wrote for me, be the good son. The tough man who never shows pain. The guy who's straight, successful, untouchable. His voice caught preemptively, emotion threatening over the edge. But inside, it was chaos. Noise I couldn't escape. Jonas's heart tightened at the flicker of vulnerability he barely let surface. He knew all too well the masks people wore, the fierce grip on identity when the world carved its own stories inside. Chaos is often what leads us to the clearest truth, Jonas said carefully, and masks can suffocate the soul if worn too long. Gabriel's fingers clenched and unclenched, a subtle tremor betraying his calm facade. I tried to ignore it. Tried to drown it in work, noise, in everything but myself. But it followed me, persistent and hungry. And now I don't know how to live with it anymore. The landscape around them seemed to lean closer, the forest holding its breath, silent witnesses to this fragile unraveling. A robin trilled nearby, a soft, hopeful song that threaded through the heavy air. Jonas's gaze softened, warmth seeping into the spaces Gabriel's words had carved out. "You're not alone in this," Jonas said, voice steady. "You don't have to live in the chaos. Here, you can start with silence and see where it leads." Gabriel's eyes lifted at last, meeting Jonas's hazel depth with a tremulous intensity. "And what if the silence brings more questions than answers?" Jonas smiled faintly, the corners of his lips touching with quiet understanding. "Then we'll sit with the questions. Together, maybe in the stillness, you'll find the courage to ask the ones you've been afraid to speak." For the first time, Gabriel's rigid posture softened. The icy walls around him faltered, revealing glimpses of something raw and true. His voice cracked again, but held steady, a fragile hope breaking through old wounds. "Okay," Gabriel whispered. "I want to try." Jonas nodded, reaching out to rest a steady hand briefly on Gabriel's knee. Unspoken promise, a silent pact forged among the shadows and sunlight of the sanctuary. The forest wrapped around them, ancient and wise, its wild heart beating in sync with their own uncertain rhythms. And in that fragile space, two broken men, one a guide, the other a seeker, began the slow, tender dance of healing. The storm rolled in quietly. At first, a distant muttering in the sky that Gabriel barely noticed as he helped Jonas secure a falcon's nesting box near the edge of the clearing. The forest around them had already begun to swell, with the usual sounds of evening, rustling leaves, the faint call of an owl settling into its haunt. But beneath that, a low rumble grew, reaching into the bones of the sanctuary like an ancient warning. Jonas didn't say much, only glanced upwards, once a crease forming between his brows. "We should finish up," he said, finally, his voice steady, but carrying an undercurrent of urgency. Gabriel followed his lead, the damp earth soft beneath their boots, as they retraced their steps to the main cabin. The rain began a steady drumbeat the moment they stepped inside, a sharp contrast to the quiet hours before. The windows, thick and old but well cared for, blurred the outside world into streaks of grey and green, the storm's fury sweeping in gusts that rattled the panes. Jonas moved to draw the curtains, sealing off the wildness beyond their walls. The sanctuary usually reassured, with its isolation, but tonight it felt like a cage, the wilderness pressing in too close. Gabriel shook his wet jacket a little, the dampness clinging to his shirt. Beneath his jaw tightened. "Looks like I'm not going anywhere any time soon." Jonas gave him a barest nod, a flicker of something unspoken passing between them. There was a strict understanding. The sanctuary was meant to be a refuge, but not a home for Gabriel. Indefinitely. Not yet. Not until the threads of his life outside began to untangle, until the chaos that had followed him here showed signs of quieting. Yet, as the minutes slipped by and the storm showed no intention of letting up, Gabriel watched Jonas hesitate at the edge of the room. "I have a spare room," Jonas finally said, his voice low and careful, almost hesitant. "It's simple. But if you want, you can stay here tonight, until the weather lessens." Gabriel blinked, caught off guard by the offer. Years of conditioning told him to refuse, to keep the boundaries clear and untouchable. He was the visitor here, after all, the client. The straight man, seeking something he wasn't sure he could find in Jonas's quiet realm. But the storm outside was relentless, a roaring hunt pressing against the fragile refuge of the sanctuary. The warmth and safety Jonas offered, bearing the weight of his invitation, tugged at Gabriel's resolve. "Yeah," he said, voice rough but willing to break the usual freeze. "I think I'll take you up on that." Jonas's lips twitched just slightly, relief fluttering quietly in his deep blue eyes. "Good. I'll get things ready for you." As Jonas moved down the hallway, Gabriel's gaze lingered on the door, framing his retreating figure. The room Jonas prepared, unadorned and humble, felt impossibly intimate despite its plainness. A simple bed, a worn but clean quilt folded at the foot, small wooden nightstand with a single lamp whose soft glow pushed back the shadows. Gabriel peeled off his wet jacket and sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress sighing under his weight. His fingers absently traced the scar above his eyebrow, the familiar groove, a reminder of old fights, old scars, both physical and emotional, that never fully healed. The sanctuary's silence folded around him, a stark contrast to the storm's violence just beyond the walls. He heard soft footsteps behind him. Jonas stood just inside the door, hands tucked into the pockets of his comfortable shirt. His expression was measured but open, a tentative offering that unsettled Gabriel more than he expected. "Anything you need," Jonas said. "You just have to ask." Gabriel swallowed hard. The room felt small, their breaths too close, the air thick with the tension of everything unspoken. He wanted to retreat, to rebuild the walls he'd just started to let down. But something, or someone, held him there. Steady and unexpectedly patient. "Thanks," Gabriel muttered, voice gravelly. "For this." "For letting me stay." Jonas nodded, stepping back with a courteous smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Get some rest. I'll be nearby if you need anything." But sleep was not the visitor Gabriel invited easily tonight. The sound of rain drumming persistently against the roof pulled at the edges of his thoughts. His mind churned, memories, fears, the ache of loneliness that had chased him through years of pretending. The boundaries Jonas respected so carefully suddenly felt fragile and blurred, the physical closeness bringing up emotions neither was prepared to name yet. After what felt like hours of silence punctuated only by the muted rumble of thunder, Gabriel found words slipping from his lips, barely audible, almost swallowed by the dark room. "I'm scared," he whispered. The admission raw and fragile as a broken branch in the night, not just of this storm, but of what happens when it's over. Jonas's footsteps came nearer, slow and sure. He sat on the edge of the bed, the quilt rustling between them. For a long moment, neither spoke. "I'm scared too," Jonas admitted quietly, "of not being enough, of being seen only as what I do, or what I hide." Gabriel's breath caught. He never expected Jonas to unravel so openly, the healer revealing the fractures beneath his calm surface. The roles they'd played, the client and the guide, blurred, tangled like the roots outside their window, deep and inseparable. "I'm so tired of pretending," Gabriel confessed, voice cracking, "of showing the world the version of me they want to see. I lie to myself, tell myself I'm fine, that it's enough, but it's not." His words stumbled, the weight behind them almost unbearable. "I don't think anyone's ever really seen me. Not the parts that don't make sense." "The parts I'm ashamed of." Jonas's fingers brushed against Gabriel's hand light. Tentative, a question without words. Gabriel didn't pull away. Instead, he let the contact anchor him, steady him in a way he hadn't expected. "You're seen," Jonas said, voice firm despite the quiet. "You're seen by me, all of you, and that's enough for now." That's a start. A lump rose in Gabriel's throat, as the honesty between them stretched like a thread of light in the darkness. The past, with all its scars and shadows pressed in, but there was something fragile and hopeful here. Two men stripped of the masks they'd worn for so long, sharing the raw edges beneath. "I don't know what this means," Gabriel whispered, heart pounding. "I don't even know if I can do this. But maybe I'm tired of running." Jonas's eyes held a kind of quiet strength that made Gabriel believe, maybe, just maybe, the sanctuary was more than a place to hide. It was a place to begin, to heal, to be real, even if real was messy and uncertain. "Then we'll face it," Jonas said softly, "together. No promises, no pressure. Just two broken men trying to find something like peace." The rain softened outside, the storm's fury spent for the moment, leaving behind only the gentle whisper of leaves touched by the wind. In the room's stillness, their breaths mingled, easy but honest. Gabriel closed his eyes, the exhaustion of the night and the tenderness of Jonas's presence pulling him toward a fragile kind of rest. He'd shown a part of himself tonight he thought was unreachable, and in doing so, he felt something tentative but profound take root, the possibility that he wasn't as alone as he believed. For the first time in a long while, the future felt less like an unsolvable riddle and more like a path uncertain, perhaps, but worth walking. And as the night deepened, two broken men shared the quiet sanctuary of a small room, each finding in the other a flicker of hope to hold on to until morning came. Morning light filtered through the small cabin's narrow windows, casting long, honeyed beams across the worn wooden floor. Dust motes floated like tiny drifting ghosts caught in the golden embrace, the kind of quiet reveal that made the everyday feel honest and new. Outside, cicadas hummed in the warming air, their steady drone a gentle counterpoint to the fragile silence inside. Gabriel and Jonas moved through the cramped kitchen space with a tentative rhythm, their bodies adjusting to the unexpected intimacy the night had carved between them. Gabriel reached for the coffee cup first, his fingers curling around the smooth ceramic with an almost absent-minded gentleness. The warmth of the mug seeped into his palm, anchoring him to the moment in ways his thoughts struggled to. His hand hovered a fraction longer than necessary, heat radiating not just through the cup, but across the thin barrier of air separating them. Jonas, standing nearby, chopping fruit for breakfast, caught the movement out of the corner of his eye and the subtle hesitation in Gabriel's touch, but he said nothing. His own hands were busy arranging the slices in a neat row, a practiced calm masking the tension, curling in his chest like a slow-burning ember. The silence between them stretched comfortably but taut, a thread strung tight with unsaid words, lingering glances, the kind of cautious hope that felt too fragile to name. Jonas met Gabriel's gaze once, silently, and found in those clear blue eyes a quiet vulnerability he recognized all too well, the kind that the forest had slowly pried open, tooth by careful tooth. "Do you want cream with your coffee?" Jonas asked softly, the words deliberate yet casual, as though normalcy could be a balm to the havoc swirling beneath the surface. Gabriel nodded, voice a hoarse whisper. "Yeah, thanks." His gaze dropped to the cup again, fingers tightening briefly before setting it back down on the counter. The mundane act, the pouring of cream, the clink of spoon against porcelain, carried a significance neither dared to voice. Jonas's pulse quickened despite his effort to steady his breathing. There was an ache behind his ribs that no landscape walked or breath held could quite soothe. It came from the weight of forbidden desire, from the ghost of all the lines they'd never meant to cross. But he maintained the mask of professionalism with practiced ease, the sanctity of his role as a guide, as a healer. This was Gabriel's journey, and Jonas's place was to walk beside him, not to step beyond the bounds painstakingly drawn in trust and necessity. Even as his heart argued otherwise, he kept his touch light, his smile neutral, the tender undercurrents locked beneath the surface. Gabriel caught the hardness behind Jonas's measured calm, gave him a glance, equal parts apology and something hopeful. "I'm sorry," he said, voice low. "I know." For a beat, silence filled the space like a held breath. Jonas shook his head slightly, a small, sad smile curving the corner of his lips. "It's okay, we'll figure this out, one step at a time." That was all they said, the words soft and honest, and carrying more weight than the room could hold. Outside, the sanctuary stirred to life. The rustle of leaves, the occasional bird call weaving its way through the still air. But inside the cabin, the morning held its breath, suspended between the remnants of last night's admissions and the vast uncertainty of what lay ahead. Asterisk. 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 The forest wrapped around them like a living, breathing entity, ancient and infinite, wild and governed by rhythms older than memory. Trees towered, their thick trunks knotted and scarred, leaves whispering secrets under the pale morning sun. The scent of pine and damp earth filled the air, grounding, real, as they stepped quietly onto the leaf-strewn trail. Their boots pressed softly into the softened soil, leaving prints that time would soon swallow. Jonas led with the practiced ease of a man who'd spent years attuned to the language of the woods. His eyes scanned the ground, noting the indentations and broken twigs that marked the passage of creatures both small and large. Gabriel followed closely, muscles tense but moving, with a rhythm that mirrored Jonas's own. They were vessels of silence and shared focus, the kind that comes not from spoken instruction, but from something unspoken, threaded through glances and breath and the subtle cues of body language. "You ready to track?" Jonas asked quietly, voice barely above the crackle of leaves beneath their feet. Gabriel nodded. "Yeah, I think so." There was a hesitance in his voice that belied his outward confidence, a fragile edge that didn't quite disappear even amid the forest's wild comfort. Jonas gave him a brief, encouraging smile. "Just watch the ground. Follow the signs. Nature doesn't lie." They moved deeper into the shadows, the canopy thickening, filtering sunlight into scattered patterns of light and shade. The wilderness felt vast, untouched, a stark contrast to the claustrophobia of their own tangled emotions. Yet, somehow, the raw, untamed beauty around them mirrored the tangled connection growing inside, messy and unpredictable, but somehow alive. Jonas crouched beside a small patch of crushed leaves. "See this?" His finger brushed the damp earth, outlining the shallow trail of paw prints. Raccoon, light on its feet. "Probably passed here last night." Gabriel leaned closer, breath catching at the detail. The forest wasn't just a backdrop. It was a participant in this fragile dance, a witness to their shifts and silences. They moved on, side by side, but neither spoke much more than necessary. Words felt clumsy here beneath towering limbs and the indifferent gaze of ancient oaks. Instead, they shared a different kind of dialogue, the rhythmic crunch of leaves, the shared anticipation as they tracked signs unseen by outsiders. At one point, Gabriel brushed against Jonas's arm as he bent to examine a broken twig. The touch lingered, a whisper of skin on skin that sent a shiver up Jonas's spine. Neither jerked away, the moment hanging in the charged air like a secret kept between the two of them and the forest. Jonas felt the heat coil low inside him, a fierce ache tempered by restraint. He focused on the ground again, forcing his eyes down, concentrating on the earth's scattered mosaics instead of the pull of Gabriel's proximity. Gabriel's breath came a little faster, eyes flicking up to meet Jonas's for a heartbeat. Wengibility shone there clear and unguarded. For a moment, the forest around them faded, reduced to a distant hum beneath the overwhelming gravity of the other's presence. They walked on, two figures bound by more than the soil beneath their boots. Every shared glance and silence stretched taut, weaving a tapestry of yearning and uncertainty threaded with cautious hope. At a clearing, the sun spilled unfiltered onto moss and stone. Jonas paused, closing his eyes briefly to breathe in the wild scent. The mix of pine resin, damp moss, and something ancient and primal. Gabriel mirrored him, inhaling deeply, his shoulders relaxing as the forest's pulse synchronized with their own. No words bridged the space between them, none were needed. Instead, the forest held them, the quiet sanctuary that had brought two broken men to stand side by side, vulnerable and raw. Somewhere amid the tangle of roots and fallen leaves, a seed was planted. Something neither could yet name, but both felt growing wild and unpredictable and, most disquietingly, beautiful. The path stretched out ahead, uncertain and winding. But for the first time, it didn't feel impossible to walk. Not alone. Not together. That evening, as dusk folded into a velvet dark, the sanctuary's familiar hum stuttered and died. The forest, once thick with the cheer and rustle of life, fell silent beneath a shroud of unexpected stillness. The blackout was complete. The cabin's windows offered nothing but pitch-black voids where warm light had been minutes before. In the sudden quiet, the absence of electricity seemed more than technical. It carved a hollow out of the night between them, exposing an unfamiliar vulnerability. Gabriel moved with steady assurance, propping open the heavy cabin door to allow the night's cool breath inside. He grabbed a stack of firewood their earlier efforts had prepared, his hands sure and practiced even as the dark closed around them. Jonas watched him, the amber hues of the fading sunset glinting in Gabriel's clear blue eyes, now tinged with something unguarded. They settled outside on a worn wooden bench, the scent of pine and damp earth thick around them. Gabriel struck flint and kindling, the sudden flare of the fire a small defiance against the swallowing black. The flames licked upward, casting a flickering amber glow that danced over Jonas's face, lean planes of his jaw, and the sharp line of the scar above his brow, both softened and sharpened by the shadows. For a long moment the silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of burning wood and the occasional distant call of an owl. Jonas felt his heart beat too loudly in his chest, awareness tightening around him like a second skin. His fingers itched to reach out to touch, but the chasm between what was and what might be seemed vast beneath the stars. Gabriel finally exhaled a breath, slow and heavy, and the tension thinned just enough to reveal something trembling beneath his calm. "I've fought against it." His voice was low, roughened by something raw. Every step of the way, I told myself this was impossible. That it wasn't supposed to feel this. He gestured vaguely at the dark woods around them, then back at the firelight, stirring in Jonas's hazel eyes. "It's like I knew all along, but I kept hitting walls. Walls I built, convinced they'd keep me safe from whatever this is. Jonas's head tipped slightly, hesitation playing on his lips before he forced the words free. "You're not alone in that. I've fought too." Pretended these feelings were shadows to ignore. Used every excuse I could find, because it was easier to believe this. He jerked a hand towards the forest. Is just some temporary refuge. Not a place for anything real. Their voices mingled with the night. Fragile confessions spilled over the glowing embers. Gabriel's brows furrowed, the vulnerability in his eyes casting a luminous honesty. I thought if I admitted it, really let it in, I'd lose control, lose everything. But, sitting here now next to you, I realized that control was an illusion anyway. Jonas's pulse steadied despite the ache in his chest. A mirrored truth shared so simply, it shattered the last of his defenses. Me too. I was scared of what that would mean. Scared of losing the safe space I'd built around myself. He paused, voice dropping to a cautious whisper. But what scares me more now is the thought of walking away from this without knowing if there's more. The fire crackled louder, sparks spiraling upwards like fleeting hopes. Gabriel's lips parted in a slow, uncertain smile. I don't want to fight anymore. Not with you. Not with this, whatever it is between us. There was a fragility in his admission that made Jonas want to reach across the space between them, to close the distance with something more solid than whispered truths. And I don't want to pretend I'm okay with it being just this, Jonas echoed. He inhaled, the sharp tang of smoke grounding himself to the moment. I want to see where this goes, without whatever walls we thought we needed. Gabriel blinked, clear blue eyes searching his face as if weighing the risk of their honesty. You mean it? You're willing to walk this with me? Jonas nodded. All the fear and hope swirling inside him condensed into that simple yes. I am. Because doing it alone is no longer an option. The fire's warmth seemed to seep deeper into their bones, melting away some of the cold uncertainty. Stars peeked through the thin